I've done all I can here.
So is this a B-movie masquerading as intellectual sci-fi, or intellectual sci-fi with the trappings of a schlocky B-movie? We are talking Carver's Gate from 1996, directed by Sheldon Icknall and starring Michael Paré. Now, this movie concerns a futuristic society where humanity has more or less destroyed the Earth with its constant use of using its finite resources. And humanity now is kind of kept sedated by a virtual reality video game. And practically the whole of the population are addicted to this particular kind of series of video games, and particularly one called Afterlife, which is a kind of like an undead, kind of supernatural action game. And the people behind this kind of game are effectively running the show here. And Michael Paré's character is a cop that deals with incidents in the kind of the dream world, so to speak, in this kind of video game, a dream cop, if you will. And he's actually kind of in a relationship with the creator of this virtual reality video game, and she is murdered. And because of the video game, there really isn't much crime in the real world now, because everyone's constantly kind of plugged in and addicted to this particular kind of video game. But she was working on some technology that actually enables you to enter the video game world like for real, so completely transfer yourself into the video game. And now the corporation wants this technology. Some of them want to effectively move the human race permanently into the video game world online because there's not enough resources on the real world. Others want to make resources in the video game and then bring them out into the real world. And of course, there's people who don't want to use it at all. Now, what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So a lot of people cite the kind of the Matrix as this kind of this world where, you know, you have this red pill and blue pill kind of reality, so to speak. But there are movies before this, and obviously this is one of them. This came out, I think, 4 years prior to The Matrix. It wasn't the first, admittedly. For example, Mind Warp with Bruce Campbell came out, I think, in 1991, that had a similar kind of idea. We have to kind of remember what kind of video games were out in 1996 to by comparison. It's easy to kind of look at today's kind of video games and see how that might be an inspiration. But in 96, obviously, the video game market was very different. I have to say, this is one of these movies when I was younger was a white whale to find for me. Back in these days, obviously, we didn't have the internet really, and all I really kind of got were magazines and stuff. And I remember seeing a photo of this and reading a little bit about it in an article on a magazine, and I was obsessed with the Cyberpunk game Shadowrun on the Super Nintendo, and desperately wanted to see this movie because it kind of sounded a little bit like a kind of a cyberpunky kind of style game. And eventually I got it on VHS and just now watched it again for this review. So let's discuss what works in Carver's Gate. I mean, this is a low budget movie and it has its flaws in regards to its production, which we'll come on to. But I have to say, I mean, it's quite a ambitious concept for a ultimately somewhat schlocky straight to TV movie, which I think is how this was made, like a Sci-Fi Channel movie. You know, in 1996, the ideas here about people getting obviously addicted to video games was somewhat prophetic if you kind of look at kind of modern society now and how people are effectively genuinely kind of plugged in, or at least that's the way that it's looking at the moment, and you know what it's doing to younger generations in regards to their kind of social interactions in kind of the real world and things like that. So you know, maybe somewhat ahead of its time in regards to its ideas here. And again, you know, you've got to remember where technology was in regards to video games kind of back then. So some interesting ideas here, and again, it's even with the kind of the environmental message. Again, it really wasn't spoken about as much back in '96. How humanity has effectively depleted all of its resources, and now is living on the kind of the bare minimum. And this is a way to just kind of distract the masses. It does have some very kind of interesting, kind of genuine hard sci-fi ideas here. Yes, it is packaged up like very much like a B movie, but there's no doubting some ambition here, to be honest with you. The other thing that this movie does, which is quite interesting, it has some reasonable kind of creature effects. One of the ideas here is that these video game characters actually end up coming out of the video game world and into the real world thanks to this kind of transference technology. So as well as people wanting to live in a video game world, video game characters end up kind of coming out. And we get a variety of kind of horror creatures that come out and attack people, and this is really largely the kind of the threat of the this movie. So that there's some kind of fun monster makeup with various kind of demonic looking creatures and zombies and things like that I have to say look kind of fun. I mean, Michael Paré's always kind of watchable. He's maybe not the most dynamic of actors, but you know, he's a popular kind of B-movie staple for a reason, because he has kind of quite a kind of a charm to him, I suppose. And as I say, when you mix him with somewhat of an interesting kind of science fiction concept, it basically has schlocky elements to enjoy, and also the kind of the more cerebral elements, to be honest with you. Even through the whole movie, I have to say the movie does feather in some interesting ideas. For example, like the idea about different perspectives about what to do with it, even from our corporation, who are effectively like the another kind of like antagonistic force to a large degree. Again, so it has these interesting kind of layers. So ultimately, I think the script here, or at least the elements of the broad story overview, is pretty strong. And there are some kind of fun elements here and there within the actual movie itself. But the rub is that this is ultimately a made-for-TV, probably somewhat quickly produced B-movie. And as such, it kind of feels like that. So although those science fiction ideas and neat kind of concepts are certainly there, the execution of it isn't particularly kind of strong. So the movie looks like it's largely filmed on a small set. The set design isn't particularly strong. The costume isn't particularly kind of strong. We get a couple of kind of shots of, you know, the populace, and a couple of like shots of like, you know, map paintings of like the cities and stuff. But we don't really get any sense of the real world here about what's actually kind of happened to the planet and stuff. It's all very kind of low budget in regards to the look of the movie. And even especially noticeable when you actually go into the kind of the game world, it just effectively has a weird filter on it and stuff, and that's kind of meant to be your depiction of this kind of particular game world and things like that. So it kind of looks a little bit cheap and silly, to be honest with you. And I have to say, I think the kind of the villain characters, these kind of game kind of creatures and stuff, when they're in the game world, they kind of just look like they're just wandering around from different movies, to be honest with you. So yeah, they kind of look fun. I think more fun in the real world, so to speak, than they do actually in the video game world, where they kind of just look like it's on the set of like a music video or something like that. As I say, Michael Paré, he isn't the most dynamic of actors, and I think he struggles here a little bit, despite his, you know, kind of like charisma to really elevate the kind of the more heady science fiction ideas. And then the supporting cast of kind of relative unknown actors, again, they're not the best actors here, to be honest with you. And again, this is a movie where I feel the concept is quite solid, but it ends up being kind of cheesy and goofy because of some of the kind of the choices both in its production design, costuming, set design, things like that, and also the depiction of the actors. Again, it comes across as kind of a little bit of a throwaway cheesy B-movie. I have to say as well, as the film goes on, the pacing of it is a little bit misjudged as well. The conclusion is actually quite, or the last act I should say, is actually kind of quite sluggish. We get like an expedition going into this kind of video game world to complete a task, and it's not exactly gripping stuff, I have to say. There's a couple of altercations with various kind of like beasties and stuff, but the action sequences are so flatly filmed, it just doesn't make it particularly very interesting, and ultimately quite a chore to sit through in some ways. So this movie, I feel, in its inception, is ahead of its time in many ways, and definitely a cautionary tale about obviously use of fossil fuels and the like for our planet, but also the way that society ends up being reliant on, you know, video games in this kind of virtual world, which some might argue is where we are headed now in real life. So, you know, could this or something like this come to pass? I guess we'll find out. So the ideas here, I think, are very strong, but it's just the actual film itself, and I suspect a lot of this is down to budgetary reasons and time constraints. Ends up being a somewhat kind of dull and drab looking movie that isn't particularly kind of exciting outside of its ideas. So it's a slightly below average movie, but I would suggest checking it out if you are interested in maybe a kind of an interesting concept at the very least. So it's a 4 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment, and I look forward to you next time.